Our first seminar in this year Transportation Systems Programs seminar series. We're very lucky to start the series with really a visitor from the other side of the world. Dr. Ansar Haq Yassar is coming to us from Belgium, from the Transportation Research Institute, which is becoming one of the really largest transportation research institutes in Europe. And his topic today is very interesting and very fitting to our theme, which like the Institute of Sustainable Transportation and Logistics. And he'll be talking about empowering citizens with sustainable transportation in the cities of today and tomorrow. Since we mentioned ICL, also we're very happy to have our two newest faculty joining the Institute, Professor Mike Wei from the School of Management and Professor Wen Dong from Computer Science. So we're very happy to have you. Just to give you some heads up, these are really the coming seminars for the coming 2 or 3 weeks. So on October 3rd, we'll have 2 of our own PhD students present. And then on October 17th, we'll have 2 other speakers to talk about really how to commercialize emerging technologies. One problem we also will have with research is that you do the research and then it goes nowhere. And actually, Professor Yassar has some experience in that regard. He's just telling us over lunch that this is something he's very interested in, making sure that the research finds its way into commercial products. One last announcement before I introduce our esteemed speaker is that we're sponsoring on November 5 our third symposium on connected vehicles, which will take place in Albany. And we're doing that in conjunction with the University Transportation Research Center, Region 2 University Transportation Research Center, conjunction with NYU and RPI and SUNY IT. And you're all obviously welcome to attend that. We're trying really to form a consortium that would push really connected and autonomous vehicle deployment in the state. Professor Ansar has a background in computer science, and he's right now, as we mentioned, working as a researcher, senior researcher and a professor at the Transportation Research Institute. He's really involved in some very big and influential projects in Europe. One of his main projects, the European FP7, I'm sure he might introduce and talk more about it during his presentation. But that project was looking at really data science. We will hear about the word of big data, and it's very closely tied to our theme here at the University of Transportation Informatics. But he was really involved in that project that is looking at big data to support the deployment of electric vehicles as one type of sustainable transportation. He's also responsible for teaching the Intelligent Transportation Systems course for the master's program there. And his interests, as you can see, involves ubiquitous computing, context-aware communication, vehicle ad hoc networks, intelligent transportation system, and mobility management. He has really several highly cited research articles in many international journals and conferences, as well as books and workshops. Professor Yassar also has been organizing an international conference for the last 3 years on agent-based modeling in transportation in general. And he's actually heading to the 3rd conference right after his visit to the US, which is taking place in Halifax. With this, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Yassar, and please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdul Sadiq, for the kind introduction. And I would like to, before I start, apologize in advance because I'm really jet lagged. And I arrived around 1 o'clock at night last night, and since I cannot sleep, then I cannot sleep because of the time difference and other problems. So my apologies in advance, because if I say something which is not correct, I'm half asleep because I had a very wonderful lunch just 1 hour half an hour ago. So. But thank you so much for the kind introduction. So the topic I've been invited to speak about is empowering citizens with sustainable transportation in cities of today and tomorrow. There are two ways to look at the sustainable or smartness aspects of the cities. One is the new IT-based approach, which most of the groups are doing, many groups in the world are doing now, using IT techniques to make cities smart, for example, by providing them with electronic signboards, dynamic signboards, giving them with car-to-car communication, those adaptive cruise control systems for the cars themselves, for the cities, smart parking, smart charging, using all kind of smart technologies, sensors and so on to help citizens use the best of the technology and live in a particular city. But there is another approach to look at it is from the which I will just discuss during my presentation today, is to see how we can tackle this from another aspect. I'm sure because you have been already have been discussing with Dr. Sadiq, and then you already have courses on activity-based modeling, travel behavior, human behavior, modeling human behavior using big data. There are a number of things that you have been already studying or teaching at your university. But what is most interesting is what you have been to study human behavior and how to use that behavior to make cities sustainable, or how to empower citizens using that. That is more interesting, because I'm sure behavior, what behavior you have here in US or Buffalo would not be the same in Europe or in Belgium. So this is interesting to see how we do it in Belgium. Is it applicable in a US scenario? If not, why not? And how we can make things similar to make the sustainable transportation happen. So this is the outline for my talk today. I'll give you a very brief introduction to the institute, very brief introduction. Then I will explain how we tackle or how we understand travel behavior. We have a number of ways. Surveys and studies, crowdsourcing, the typical ways. I will give you some explanation from the business aspect also. How we use these technologies to go to the market and really start small spin-offs from these research ideas. So don't think that a spin-off can only it can only happen once you have something really state-of-the-art or cutting edge, but probably you never know about this, because I've been talking to a number of stakeholders, number of people like, I don't know if you know about them or not, Catapult, or in UK, which is a big organization whose job is to take research products to the market. But I was talking to one of the business development directors, his name is Jason, and he told me something very interesting. He said, look professor, what you are doing is something that will happen in 20 years probably, but what we need now is something really basic. So what the world needs or what the market needs could be very, very simple, so we don't need to think very complex. Let's do complex research and let's bring very simple products to the market. And when we did it, and we went very successful with it. So just before coming here, I was also involved in a spin-off company, and we recently launched it last week, so I was quite busy with that as well. And then what it does, I will explain to you later. There are some flyers I brought with me. I will distribute them a while later. It will explain you what we do. Then from the travel behavior, we also need to see how we can use this travel behavior data information to solve real world problems like congestion, emission, health, electric vehicles. So electric vehicles is the next big thing that they say, and I don't fully agree to it, but let's see how it works. Especially not in the context. For example, this is again very interesting to study. I believe this can happen. Probably they will be successful in the European market, but probably not so much in the US market because of many number of things. Then can we see an activity-based transportation model as a solution after studying travel behavior? Can this model help make transportation sustainable? And then I will give you some examples, brief examples from research results, projects, case studies. Flanders, for those of you who don't know about Flanders, don't mind. I hope you haven't seen Simpsons, all of you. So there's a character Flanders. So actually it's to make a mockery out of it, but it's a small part, small region inside Belgium. So I don't know how many of you, can I have a raise of hand, know about Belgium? Okay, so many of you. And what do you know about Belgium, by the way?
Beer.
Beer?
Belgium chocolate.
Chocolate. Okay. All of the typical stuff. Sorry? Manneken, you know really a lot about this. This is something very typical. But I mean, people in US, they don't know, and I don't blame them. But because if you see at the map of Europe, you really find a small thing in between, the middle of everything, which is so-called the capital of Europe, but it's Belgium. It has a population of about 11 million people and divided into 3 different parts. One is called Flanders, where we are located in. Flanders is the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium. And then we have a French-speaking part called Wallonia, and we have a very small, with 10,000 people, a German-speaking part. So it's a complex country with complex problems and complex policy matters. So that's how, and that's why it's very interesting to see how activity-based models work in our part of the world. And I'm sure it will work anywhere else. So having said that, we are located, so this is Flanders. In the Belgian context, we are located, there are 5 universities in Flanders. All are public funded universities, so when you see 5, you don't think a lot, but it's enough because we are a country, Flanders has a population of 6 million people. And we are one of the smallest universities, or the newest universities established in 1971. But we are the biggest one in transportation sciences because we are the federal government's Institute for Transportation Research as well. And we are also affiliated with the European Commission. We are an independent school on mobility sciences. But why I say new is because, for example, if you take the example of Catholic University Leuven or Ghent, they were established in 1401 or 1425, and then you can see a 1,000-year-old university and a 30-years-old university, you can feel a difference. So having said enough about Flanders, at Hasselt University, we are the Transportation Research Institute, IMOB, I-M-O-B. We are not MOB, not affiliated to MOB as well, but it's a Dutch word and converted into a bad. I think what it means in English is okay, not so nice, but still. We have 3 research domains. The biggest one is travel behavior, or what we call mobility management. The second biggest is traffic safety. We have about 35 people working in the traffic safety domain. We have a very nice, fancy simulator as well. I'm sure you also have one. So that's why I'm saying I cannot tell you something new, but what I can tell you is something interesting from a European point of view. Then we have logistics, and we are dealing with the optimization of supply chain, dealing with how to because we have a number of things. Within Flanders, we have waterways, we have, I could not show you here, but we have waterways, we have trucks, we have rail things, so how to optimize all of this, right? I personally belong to the travel behavior group, and inside the travel behavior, I even belong to a smaller group, which is of 5 people. We deal with intelligent transport systems problems. But here I will give you an explanation of an overall things that we are dealing with. So in total, we are about 180 people at the research group, and we're quite small in number, but we are quite significant as well. Okay, so let's, before going beyond, let's think of some psychological reflections. When we think about value of time, of activities, I mean, for many of the people say, traveling is the least important, and leisure is the most important. Let's go into the details why. Probably they are confused, probably they don't know how to really say something about the value of time. Let's keep this into your minds, and we will discuss about this later. However, I mean, ideal travel time, again, in the Flemish context, I don't know how applicable in this in a worldwide context, is 16 minutes. So everything less than 16 minutes is positive experience. Everything more than 16 minutes of travel time is negative experience. I think 16 minutes probably will not be true for the US context, because probably every day you travel more than 16 minutes. And people become used to the environment and the context they live in. So people are habitual people, we are habitual, as humans we are habitual. So every day I use my car. I will keep on using my car because it's my habit. I don't want to go to a bus, take a bus, wait for a bus. I will follow route I-19 or whatever because I use it every day and I know about it. So people are habitual. So it's good for us as a scientist because we can predict their activities, or we can predict what they will do in the future because they will repeat their habits in the future as well. If you look at the Aspen effect, where you know more about than I do, is the city in Colorado. What happened there is the commuting distance become longer and longer. People became unhappy because of their long travel distances, because of prices of houses. So they could not afford to live in a city center or close to the city center or close to the work locations because of prices. So they had to make a compromise between the price of a house and long travel time and distance. Changes in travel time are more troublesome than actual travel time. So what we don't like is if we will have to travel for half an hour. We perceive that we will travel for half an hour from my work location from my home location to work location. But if I spend 1 hour, I don't mind much. But if I spend if someone asks me to change my particular route, and I will save 15 minutes, but I still perceive that I will take 30 minutes from a particular location. So it's much more difficult for me to change my habit to another location, though it is saving me time, but because of my habits only. So for me, that's the reason. Another reason, the value of time is it's something very personal. Let's assume that we could all solve all congestion problems. There are no congestions anymore. We will have, according to the research available, we will have less than 15% time gain as a whole. So focus illusion exists in transport. So things become more important if you start thinking about it. For instance, from a research point of view, how long does it take you to go to your work? I mean, if I ask this question to all of you, someone will say 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes. That's your perception. How long does it take you in reality? People will say different things depending on the time of the day, depending on the situation. How happy you are working at a particular place with your travel time, that's another personal question. But what we find is that it is not as worse as it seems, that since people do not change their behavior. So again, this even makes my statement more concrete, that people do not change, they are habitual. So they will repeat activities, they will do, even if they want to, even if we suggest them to change, that they will save some time, so they will, they have to change adapt to a new route. It's much more difficult to make them adapt to a new route as compared to what they're already doing. So, I mean, how do we do it? How shall we do it? Then it will, if we can do it, then there will be a difference in terms of all of these factors. So let's suppose in Flanders, again, not the Simpson Flanders, but the Flanders in Belgium, 6 million population. You can imagine there are a number of modes of transport. So if you see the division, we have cars as driver's car as a passenger, so probably you're car sharing with someone, carpooling with someone, train, bus, tram, metro. You have bike. By the way, bikes, I haven't seen any bikes at Buffalo for some reason. And we have a lot of bikes. So let's suppose we have 7,000 students, we have 7,000 bikes. That's as simple as that. And even now they're encouraging every staff member to give them a free bike, just ride a bike. And we are a bike city in Alpha. On foot and on other modes of transportation. So you can see car as a driver has a huge impact on the overall modal split in Flanders. Why? Again, for a number of reasons. If you see from a Flemish context, or if you see from a US context, things could be different. Probably, as an example, US people may or would like to go to use public transit because of they don't like to get stuck in a traffic jam because it's too expensive in terms of fuel prices. In Flanders, why people do it, though fuel prices are much more expensive. So you can see a price of a gallon is about $7 in Belgium, as compared to US, it's almost free. And if you see, still people drive cars. Why? We have much more expensive road taxes. The cars are much more expensive. I cannot compare easily, but what is the price of an average car? I'm in a sedan.
License paid off.
It doesn't matter, just the price. So if you want to buy a 4-door sedan, what would be the price? $50,000 to $20,000, right? A similar car would cost you at least 25,000 euros, 30,000 euros in Europe to buy a similar sort of car. So taxes are much more expensive. But still, and this was interesting to see as a model shift, because the reason what we found out was because of a lot of, this was a big question. So we did some analysis, so we used some transportation models, and we found out that because of a lot of company cars, company paid fuel, people still would like to drive their car, and they perceived that they will take less time to go from point A to point B, though in reality it took them triple the amount of time as they would have done with a train. And this is reality. I will show you later as well. In Belgium, we are the worst country with traffic jams because of 2 reasons. Brussels, I don't know how many of you know Brussels, and Antwerp. So everything, it's bad planning, bad infrastructure. If you have to go anywhere, you have to cross these 2 cities at any cost. Anywhere. There's just such a small country. So even all trains pass through Brussels. Okay? This is important. Again, if you see this from another perspective, mode choice and distance. I will not spend too much time here, but if you see number of modes, again, car driver, car passenger, you can see the gradual increase in terms of as soon as the distance increases. But initially, if you see here, there is not so much difference, and it would be easy to propose them to switch with a reasonable amount of kilometers, because they can still do the same trip with another mode of transport with less or with more ecological, eco-friendly transport, and less time as well, of course, or same time as well. I will not spend too much time again here as well, but there is another point of view on this. So society reflected in travel behavior, if you see what kind of activities they do, and you have from 2007 till 2013, you can see increase or a stable increase as a proof that people do not change much. Then they do business activities, you will not see a lot of differences, except when there was a financial crisis. You will have work activities, shopping activities is the highest, and so on. Probably it's not true for the US context, but this is what we observe from the Belgian context. This is probably not very important. So travel time per kilometer, we did some survey on a number of modes of transport. So we can see that by foot, average between 0.1 to 1 kilometer. So the average time is about 19.62. By bicycle is 7.8, and so on. So you can see the comparison to see how many people do it and what is the travel time, and how you can swap one mode of transport to another one, because the travel time won't change. If you want to convince me to take a train because it takes the same amount of time, but I have less stress, I can sit in a train, work, read, it's possible, but how? How can we convince people? This is interesting to know. Also, to tell them by numbers, to see, look, this is exactly what you can do in a similar amount of time, why not? Again, there are regional differences, as I already said, and also land use differences. So probably someone living in a business zone or an industrial zone would do less travel, because most probably he's working in a similar industrial zone or a work zone. People living in rich, so this is, for example, if you see this, so you have a difference. So this is Wallonia, this is Flanders, in between this is something small, it's called Brussels. And people doing economic activities would be different for each. So this is the Belgian context. I will not go into detail. So each region of Belgium, what people do as in terms of regional and land use differences. If you go a bit further and see again. The factors evaluation of person kilometers, the collective system. If you see the collective system, sorry, the graph says something in Dutch. So I will explain. This is the first one is passenger travel. This is per person travel with as a passenger. Then you have office cars. Then you have some building block level per household information. And you see the travel aggregate is growing since 1995, and it has been a gradual increase. But and there was also average number of kilometers driven as an individual. So and average number of trips per day. You can also see them from here. That is in Flanders probably. There are 3.14 trips in 2007. They are decreased by 2.72 because of a number of reasons. But the average kilometers are driven per day remain almost stable. So growth has also caused by other factors than individual travel behavior. So growth is another responsible factor behind this. So you will see inhabitants, for example, as an example, in Flanders in 2006 there were 6 million population, 2004, and by 2013 now there are 6.3 million population. So probably trips have reduced, but population spread has become bigger, so people still travel more distances to work. Also, another reason is more cars sold per family or per household, so there are more cars now, and economy, of course, is the third reason. So how to get this data, or how to make sure that we include people? So the first was the surveys that we can do. So there is first approach you can give them each household or each person living in the country, you can give them with a survey data or a form to fill in, a questionnaire to fill in about their daily travel, so their activities. Second way to use this is to involve them using crowdsourcing, so to involve them in the procedures crowdsourcing. One example is, and we again sold this as a product. This is very simple, it's called Moving Forward. Moving Forward is a GIS-based ICT application to produce digital accessibility maps. So I don't know, something is wrong. But I'm not worried because we're an earthquake group, so probably the building is safe. Moving Forward is a platform where with this application you can visualize and in a quick and easy way the accessibility of locations. Why we did this was a historical reason behind it. Please correct me because I have no idea about US, but do you need or in US the schools, do they have an accessibility plan or a school accessibility plan? Is it not required?
You mean for people with,
no, for accessibility plan is general plan, which routes are safe for students to take and how
there is a program for safe routes to school.
Safe routes to school.
Yeah.
So we have something similar in Flanders. So it's also called, if you translate it literally, safe routes to school. So each school has to have an accessibility plan, a safe accessibility plan, because students or the children who go to the school every day usually go with the bikes themselves. And what we did was we gave them this application. This application was initially to just collect data about accessibility. We used them in this context. So one application was to visualize safe routes to school, and we gave each school a system to, and they asked their students to install this app on their phones, which tracked their daily travel patterns. And what we tried to identify was potential black spots, potential hazards. Also, this was an offline application of it, and then it made an accessibility plan for this. The second application was, once this accessibility plan was already done, the second application was that if there is a deviation from the plan or personal individual travel of children, so we can also ensure their safety every day. If, for example, a child is going from a particular location from their home to the school by bike, and all of a sudden in between stops, probably he or she had an accident, probably there was a problem, probably there is a traffic jam. I don't know, some of the bullying in the evening or something like this, so you can see anomalies in the patterns. And with these anomalies, you can even learn beyond what you planned to do initially. I think there's an earthquake for sure. So what was the procedure that we gave them? As I already explained this. It was logged at the back end, and then it was particularly reported to the back office, and it was plotted on a map with the whole complete system and all these potential hazards and potential danger spots in the plan. And then you can adapt the plan, rerun the plan, ask the students to rerun and see if this plan is more accessible, easier, safe, or not. Then the second part is to see, this is again another tool, another application that we developed, and we sell it as a system as well. It's called Mobi Melder. What we do here is participation, and it's a participation and communication tool, which was very generic. We said, okay, we give you a phone, please record your daily travel diaries and on your phone. People said, why should we do it? They did, some didn't do it. But then from this idea, starting from this idea to collect data, we came to a conclusion, why not make it more interactive for them? So they gave us data, but we also gave them a free smartphone, but they can also report and communicate. So what happens in a community in Belgium, we have each community or council or town has an application portal. You can report your problems to the council, and council decides randomly what to fix first. Let's suppose there's a pothole, or there is a lamp broken, there is a zebra crossing missing, street light broken, n number of problems. And then what we did was let them report. There was an algorithm behind it who optimizes based on based on a number of things. So number of things could involve the priorities of the council, the budgets available, the laws, the policies, many number of things. So what it did was just prioritize the application and optimize what to fix first based on many reasons. So safety, for example. So people didn't care about it, they just kept on taking pictures. I will go further. There is a web-based application, so what happened is there is a mobile version of the application. People can take it with them. We record their activities with this, travel behavior with this, their travel patterns with this. And then on top of this, they can also report problems. So there was a second part of the application.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes,
So,
please.
how many phones that you are giving away for free?
10,000 phones.
Huh?
10,000 phones.
And all the data also is paid for, or?
As again, we are public sector university. It was public funded, so data is with the university.
No, not the collected data, but the bandwidth, the cellular, the data usage.
The cellular did.
When you give a phone, you also have to give like a
Data plan. Yes.
Yeah, data plan.
We gave them with the data plan.
Also
So
free.
that was, yes.
How much money is that?
It was, it's a very good question. Actually, it's a very good question. Just to do it for 10,000 people in 2 groups, so actually 20,000 people, it cost us about 1.1 million euros.
For how long?
Analysis.
Like
It took us a couple of years actually. So we started it many years ago, not with these smart apps. We started off with the old smart PDAs. I don't have the picture here. And those GPS enabled PDAs, old techniques, there were many errors with those. And then we tried to make it very smart. So we research started from those PDAs. And this 1.1 million euros started from there. And then we collected data in about 8 years' time in total. And we again do re-validation studies. We do small sets of data collection again to make those data up to date. But then we ended up this as a product. We sold to 200 councils this product called Mobi Melder. So Melder means in Dutch, in English it would mean reporting. Mobi is mobility, so reporting any mobility problem. So it's very simple. People taking a picture of a pothole, goes to the application, goes to the to the council, goes to the back office, it gets fixed or gets updated. But I mean, this is something that you can do, and then you can also up to date as a citizen. You're also happy because you have your say. You can reach to the best or to the maximum level possible, and you as a council, you're also happy because you have a way to say, look, the system said problem number 1 we will solve first, so don't be angry, stay quiet for 6 months, we will fix your problem as well. This is true because we are not like Switzerland, but people have a lot of strikes in Belgium. So every 2nd day, 3rd day, 4th day, there's a strike for something. And people stop striking because of this. At least in some councils who adopted for this. Again, not doing, we are conscious of the time as well, so I will go a bit further. If there are questions, we can take them later as well. So from all of this, we can see the crowdsourcing survey data can be what we did with this travel behavior. We understood how people behave in a particular way. Can we use this to solve real world problems? For example, congestion, for example, pollution. Though this picture does not look like Brussels, but this is exactly what happens in Brussels. So from city where I live in is Leuven, and Brussels is about 15 kilometers away, and it takes me during peak hours 1.5 hours, 2 hours, 3 hours to reach the center of Brussels by car. So third application would be how to reduce or to ensure people go for electric vehicles or adapt to electric vehicles easily. Which again, having said that, I don't believe will happen in US. Topic 1 again. So let's focus on topic 1, congestion a little bit. The context behind this. So congestion is always caused by demand, so which follows from travel behaviors of the individuals. That's very clear, and it results in what we do is there are major economical implications behind it. So normal traffic jam, for example, in Flanders every day is 140 kilometers. Belgium is not big, so Belgium is very small, and this is big traffic jam then. Because 140 kilometers you cross in any direction, you can cross Belgium after 10 more kilometers. So it's not big as a country. Then it would cost you about 250,000 euros per day based on your travel time, fuel, your time, and so on. It is calculated based on a very complex economics equation. Don't ask me what, but there are intelligent people in our group who do this. Antwerp and Brussels are number 1 in Europe according to INRIX in traffic jams. We are the worst in traffic jams. We preach, but we don't like to be preached. So peak hours phenomena is, although only about 35% of the traffic demand during peak hours is related to work activities. So there are other activities also involved. So this is a very typical example of wrong type of inductive reasoning. Yeah? So this is very interesting to see of what we do.
Can you elaborate on this last comment?
So what we assumed was this traffic jam during peak hours is because of work activities, but that was, we found out that was not true, because it was a wrong assumption from our side. Before we had models like an activity-based model, we could not say why, because of which activity this is, which activity is causing this traffic jam, because traditional 4-step models do not tell you this level of detail. So you know there is a traffic jam, but why? So this is an example just to give you, I will explain you what we do in activities and how we can calculate this. So any transportation model can calculate effects of infrastructure adaptation, for example, new, less roads, but the important thing is that most solutions are not sustainable because of problem of induced latent demand. So for example, available capacity absorbed by the new traffic. We always build new infrastructure, or build new roads, expand it to. So very recent example is Amsterdam. They have a very big traffic jam they used to have between their central part to Amsterdam. But what they did was they expanded a 3-lane motorway, a stretch of about 100 kilometers to a 7-lane on each side. But as soon as they made it 7-lane, it became less congested for 1 month or 2 months. Again, in 3 months, it became really congested. So you build more infrastructure, it's a wrong solution, there will be more traffic jam. This is not the solution, you have to find out another solution. So what is the solution? Solution for, one of the solutions would be to use traffic demand management. So what are traffic demand management measures? What is traffic demand management? Is strategies and policies to reduce travel demand or to redistribute demand in space and time. How you can do it, for example, by asking people to, or looking at people's activities and their working habits and see if teleworking is possible. For example, there is a salesman who is traveling every day 40 kilometers just to go to his work. Before he goes to his clients, probably a client is next door. So you can introduce another kind of a policy where they're allowed to work from home or remote working, and this reduces a part of the jam. Parking policies, pricing policies. Parkings are ridiculously expensive. Congestion pricing, for example, London. I don't know which cities in US uses it, London has congestion pricing, Stockholm has congestion pricing, so you cannot enter the center of the city without paying a very high fee of $20 or so. So lack of understanding of about travel behavior put limitations of what can be done in traditional models. This is again what I said before, 4-step models cannot say this, so we have to go beyond 4-step models to be able to study this behavior. Also, travel demand is not about aggregate numbers, so aggregate bias, but especially also about more detailed subgroups and segmentations. For example, day of the week could also play a very important role. So we cannot say in a month's time I saw this was the case, but we don't know which activity was important, but which day was important also. Probably on every Monday we have this because of something. So we have to see what something is. So example 2 was emissions and health. This is also very clear. I will not go into details there, but how to reduce these pollution levels. We have ozone problems, we have monoxides, we have this nitrogen oxides. So how can we reduce this industrial pollution, household pollution, traffic-related pollution? So consequences for human health, for example, there are 2 examples there: Meuse Valley fog in 1930, London smog of 1952. I don't know if you have studied this, but it became really bad beyond human living conditions. So EU came up with a directive in 2008. This has to be reduced by 20% by 2020. So it's a big thing. Unless it's done, the countries will be fined. Again, so the second, again, related to the exposure of this. So health is also how we calculate this exposure. So classical method of doing this is we have high resolution concentration data. So we multiply it with the census data or population data, and we have the whole overall figure. So this is also not, okay, this is good enough, but this doesn't tell us enough about why, which part, which activity, and how we can calculate it on a more fine-grained scale. I will go back to it, how we do it for Flanders in coming slides. Third is how to let people drive electric vehicles, because there is a lot of...
Can somebody check what we are doing?
So, don't worry about this, we're not quick safe building, I'm sure. Electric vehicles, we combine interesting sustainability aspects. For example, what electric vehicles can do is amazing. I mean, they reduce noise pollution, they reduce environmental pollution. Again, environmental impact is something that we have to calculate. Either we are calculating it wheel to tank or tank to wheel. It depends how we calculate this, because it depends if you're producing nuclear fuel and you're saying, okay, here you're bringing in electric vehicles. It's still not environmental friendly, because something is going on at the nuclear plant. Either you say, I shut my eyes and I don't care what happens and how is electricity generated. But if it has to be clean, then we have to fully rely on a sustainable mode of production of electricity, like wind and hydro, many other sources. So they have environmental advantages. So they are clearly, as I already mentioned, simply electricity users or an intelligent actor in an interconnected smart grid network. So what would be interesting is to see how electric vehicles change your travel behavior. Not only travel behavior, how would they impact on policy related decisions, for instance, where to put. So we have nowadays we have charging stations, but we have petrol stations, but they will not be the same. The gas stations, you go there, in 2 minutes you're filled, you're gone. But how to charge or how to adapt your travel behavior so you can complete your trips, you can do all your trips and still be able to have some charge left to recharge your car, because a battery enabled vehicle would take something like 20 minutes with a rapid charger to charge, and it's not 20 minutes, it's not 2 minutes. So what we have is lack of potential in theory. We don't know what happens. We don't know if the trips are doable. What are the problems? What are the strong points? So we need to push this as a policy mayor. We have to prove that this is doable. This is doable in a scenario where all these countries who say, for example, UK say we are investing a lot of money in the charging stations, also Holland, France, Portugal, you just name it. So all of Europe is now moving towards, or want to move towards this to reach the 2020 goals, the 20% reduction goals. But they don't know, for example, there are many open questions. Where to put these charging points? Do we have to put them at the same? What would be the impact on the grid? Are we going to burn the grid or something? Because if everyone starts charging their car, just imagine this, what will happen to the grid as well? So we have to see how we can do it in an intelligent way. I already, I think, said that, so we have to, so one of the important things that I haven't mentioned is range anxiety. For example, why the biggest reason that we found out people do not want to switch to an electric vehicle is range anxiety. So you don't know, you want to be, people want freedom. Though they will drive 80 kilometers or let's say miles, something like 40 miles a day from home to work and back, and an electric car can easily do 80 miles with a one charge, they will still not feel comfortable because they don't know about this, that they drive 40 kilometers. So if I asked you the question, how many kilometers do you drive in a day? Somebody will give some estimate, but you don't know exactly what. So how we can do it is also using some kind of intelligent models like activity-based models to really prove my point. See, this is your travel pattern, you drive this much per day, don't be afraid of the range, you can just drive it, so please adapt to a new mode of transport. And again, we have to see when to charge, where to charge. If everybody starts charging at night, because electricity prices, for example, are cheaper at home at night, something will really happen to the grid. So they will really shift the peak to another side, and then what will happen to the grid? Do we have enough power available? I don't know if you heard about it or not. I'm sure this is not the case in US, but in Belgium this winter they already said, look guys, there are a lot of electric vehicles now. We have 250 electric vehicles in the province of Limburg, and they are causing a lot of trouble. So and one of the nuclear plants is shut down. So we might have blackouts of 8 hours a day. A country like Belgium, a capital of Europe, and they don't think about these things before. So someone had to do this pre-computation. I'm not blaming the electric vehicles, but I'm blaming also the power failure. They were shutting down a nuclear power plant because they want to go green. They want to go for sustainable modes of electricity production. So in summary, what kind of research problems we can tackle are these TDMs, so health-related exposure problems, and individual behavior, range anxiety, and adaptation-related problems for new technologies like electric. So this is, as a whole, it's important to help us understand the behavior of individuals. What we do, there are a number of things. I'm sure you are aware of the 4-step model. So the traditional transportation models, which are 4-step. There are the state-of-the-art models. I cannot call them state-of-the-art. They have already been there for over a decade. So more than 12 years, activity-based models have been there, but very few councils or very few regions have adopted to this new technology. Theory is based on, for activity-based models, the theory is based on that the travel is a drive demand. We model daily activity patterns, so multi-dimensional. So if you see this figure here, you have vertical lines that represent activities. You have, for example, home, shopping, work, lunch, home. And then diagonal lines are travel episodes, so from when to when, from which time to which time, from which location to which location you do this. Explicit representation of time of occurrence for all travel episodes linked to an associated activities. You can also see this from this activity-based model. Activity-based model also generates an activity pattern for model individuals, so we know when and where they are at all times. Actually, we are becoming an NSA for them. So this is quite dangerous, but okay, apart from that, we anonymize everything, but we can still, even if we aggregate this, we anonymize this, we still can know, there are ways to know where people live, where most of the people work, what are the activities from an activity-based model. So that's why this is one of the reasons that councils are hesitant to adopt to the new kind of model to predict better the applications that we discussed before. So as an example, as already Dr. Sathik mentioned in his speech, where something about DataSim. So this is a picture that I took from the DataSim project. it was a big project where what we had to do is to compare modeled reality, that is an activity-based model, for example, with observed reality, the big data. So big data is what we have, but observed reality is very, very difficult to get. For example, I can have your cell phone call records, but I cannot have your GPS log for the same individuals for those who have the cell phone call records. But not having access to such information, we still can combine a number of sources. For example, I can combine your call record or cell phone data with social network data or Twitter data, and a number of data, and then we can still what we can do is still beyond your comprehension. I mean, this is quite amazing to see. We used, as an example, we used call data for 15,000 people in Berlin, for the region of Berlin, and we tried to deduce from their call records, try to find out which activity or which type of location is this. So we try to find out if it is home or it is work location or a social activity location, so or something else. It's not 100% accurate, but you will still see that we could identify home and work and social activity with more than 70% of the accuracy. So it's quite amazing to see what you can do already with this big data. You've already been working, a lot of you have been working on big data. So what we did in this project, we tried to model, we tried to compare this, and there were some validation and calibration runs that we did with this. And so we could see that a lot of the model reality was representing observed reality. So this was what we modeled, and what the simulator spit out as an output was close to reality. So we can believe in that, and we just.
Sorry, I think I missed the first part, but then when you model the behavior, what kind of model?
It's an activity-based model. I was just explaining it before. So here in this model reality, we use an activity-based model where we have activities of each individual. So we log this. We have your activity data. What trips do you do per day? What are the purpose of the trips, and so on. And then we have a travel pattern for an individual. We have an aggregated travel pattern for a whole community. You can compare it to big data, for example, loop detector data or traffic counts for a region, and you can see, okay, I found out my aggregated activity-based data says that at this particular link, for example, between Buffalo and New York, or even smaller, something smaller, you have 10,000 cars per day. And then you can see from observed reality, from your loop detector data or this traffic count data or this sensor data, that you have about 10,000 cars per day. So what you estimate, what you predict is the reality. This is what we are trying to say.
Oh, is it discrete choice-based models or
Yes.
agent-based? Oh, discrete choice.
Agent-based is something what we are focusing on now. I will not say more about it, but in agent-based models now, what we are trying to do is to see how. But agent-based models are not applicable on each and every situation that easily. But they best fit for which I see is that they can fit on in all kind of unexpected events, for example, earthquake or flooding, or then you can see how, because you don't have to calibrate, the whole population doesn't have to negotiate with each other or communicate with each other to define their travel behavior. Huh? You need to have a small set of people to communicate with each other for an evacuation scenario. So then you see how do the two agents behave, how do they communicate with each other, what are the rules behind a particular communication, why you make such a decision. So we have game theory, we have colleagues from KTH, from Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm, who have this game participatory platform where they see why people make this decision, why left, why not right in an evacuation scenario. Because this is very difficult to model, because the only goal that you have in an emergency situation is to go out of that situation. That's the biggest goal. But then what we miss is probably there are some constraints that we are missing. Probably you have a family or you have a child who is in a school nearby. So you will not run away, but you will try to go first to get your child and run away from this situation. So what are the constraints? How do we communicate these? That will be observed from that. Because I think I'm very conscious of the time now because of 5 minutes. left. So what we have at EMOP, we have a platform, we have a framework which is yet not open source because we sell it as a consultancy product. And the spin-off company is Feathers. So Feathers is a framework forecasting evaluationary activity travel demand of households and their environmental repercussions. But what it does is an activity-based model. It uses a number of, before getting to the data point, it's a model framework incorporating different schedulers. Currently, we have one full scheduler working operational for Flanders. So because you have to have a scheduler calibrated to a particular scenario. You cannot use Flemish scenario and say, okay, let's use it for Buffalo. So scheduler would be different. Your activities would be different. Your patterns would be different. We have a number of decision trees, 27 decision trees, which help us make these decisions about your activities and your predictions about your travels. We have already configured it for a number of regions. Flanders in Belgium, Netherlands is working, Slovenia, Maribor, so it's working for Slovenia, and we have been successfully implemented it for Seoul in South Korea, the same model. What kind of data do we need to run such a system is quite interesting. Because we have a concept of zoning, I will not go into details unless there is something very unclear, but we use different kinds of layers. So if you can see, we have 41 square kilometers, 12 square kilometers, 5.5 square kilometers, and 1 square kilometers area. So you can see it from here. What we do is to see what we try to first of all go from building block level to the most aggregated level possible to give a scenario to go closer to what we have. So we can aggregate on different number of zones, so we have subzones. For a small place like Flanders, in building block we have 10,521 subzones, zones in Flanders of each about 1 square kilometer, 1.1 square kilometer. So land use and transport network data is the second input, transport network. So we have free floating car travel time, congested travel time. So we have BTM travel time, bus, tram, metro travel time. We have land use data per zone, so urban density, total number of employees, school, children, for example. Full population data, so census data we have household information, your incomes, and all kind of this data. We calculated this, and then we have the diary data that we just collected using apps and surveys and so on. All this data is required to run Feathers. So you have to have this data, have this in proper format, and then the Feathers can run it for. So we were able to run it for 6 million people in Flanders. We have also run it for Seoul and for Sylvania as well. So this is a picture of the zoning concept in Flanders. Let's go further because it's the same. And this is 12 square kilometers, so you will just see 5.5 square kilometers what happens to Flanders, and if you go to 1.3 square kilometers what happens. So you can go to very fine-grained detail and see, okay, this zone is a dead zone, probably it has no activities, no travel problems, no need to have a public transit line deployed here as a policy, or something else, or there is no emission here because of this. Then this is, I will skip this slide, but this is a travel diary. What is a travel diary? You have a number of activities. You have morning sleep hour. We start from 3 o'clock. I don't know why, for some historical reason, we started with 3 a.m. as sleep time, morning sleep time, and there is an evening sleep time. It was started before me. I don't know why, but there was a reason behind it at that time. And then you have work activities. You have mode of transportation. So you can calculate a lot of details for 6 million people. We have this. We have infinite. We can do infinite number of combinations. For example, when shopping, we can know when people do shopping, from which time to which time, at which location, for example. We have the sequential information, really sequential information. We have these OD matrices, detailed segmentation in space and time because of this. And in general, what I said before, it can do beyond the traditional 4-step models. So if you see, just an example analysis of tours and trips, you can see this. I don't know if it's that clear, but for example, the pink thing is 510 kilometers. So you can see the number of tours and trips, frequencies, modal choice, distance and time and distribution, detailed segmentation. For example, we can say, what is the modal split for 65 plus? Which kind of mode they use, how many times they use which zones and which zones, so you can see the relative amounts of trips leaving each municipality in Flanders. So approximately 10,000 trips leave from each of these pink blocks per day. These are the videos. I don't know if they will work. I hope it doesn't crash. Okay, there's some problem. I think the video is left on my laptop and the battery is dead because I don't have a converter, so I'm sure they will not work. But what they show is to see this time thing. So once your model is done, you can run this and see how this evolves. This is a typical picture. You can peaks and off peaks and which links are busy at which level. So we are using the building block level now. The lowest fine grid level, 1.3 square kilometers. For congestion, we ran this telecommuting scenario. One of my colleagues did it, and as an example of this TDM layer, and we found out that you can really help reduce congestion if you enable the population, because you can see there is a reduction of over 1.6%. If you see, you can convince people to do teleworking. I will not go into the numbers in detail because there's a number of things that we calculated in Flanders. So what we did was we had this input data as study area data, so attractiveness of locations, so shop, inhabitant, employment. We have transportation network data, synthetic population, and then we have activity calculations. We use this for model calculation. And you can see that if you also swap some activities, you can also, for example, if you can replace going to work activity with staying home activity, you already reduce a chunk of, you take a chunk out of the main network, so the congestion you can take out of it as well. Or you can, what you can already see that if you can, so if you, for example, if your work activity is also at home, so this is what I mean. You don't have to go to a location A to do work. You can already stay home, so this big chunk of activity is already reduced by telecommuting. I will not go into details here. This is just how we did it. Because of time, because I want to say something before it's already finished. And then we already see that this is the work and the telework scenario, so tour activity sequences, percentage of work versus telework. Emissions, we also did something. So you can already see that we did an exposure assessment, and what we tried to do is just to combine activity-based model, this which is albatross or feathers, with an emission model Mimosa, and then with a dispersion model Aurora, which is calculating this air quality in urban regions and so on. And then we combine this model to come up with this concentration, this pollution maps, we can say. I will go over this quickly. So this, you can see this exposures to different kind of pollutants, and you can see which zone was mostly affected because of this reason. Exposure for also human health, which people are exposed to because of which kind of activity in which subzone. And so if you do this, you can already calculate based on this exposure factor. For electric vehicles, we try to calculate when people can travel, when people can charge. So you can see, because based on these activities and the level of the battery and type of the vehicle, you can see when do you need to charge. Can you do your travels or not based on this activity-based model? And if you can, how often do you need to recharge? And you can try to see if that location is recharge friendly or there is enough. Are you going to create some bottlenecks? So 70% of all trips is feasible to execute by battery electric vehicles. That is what we found for Flemish situation. This is quite interesting to see. And we ran a number of scenarios. So we ran charging scenarios for uniform low cost, last home. So you always, or you always charge at home. So each home arrival charge. So you can see a number of trends. We can say we have to do some peak shaving, or if there is a more power requirement or not. So you can see this in this graph, this figure below, the distribution of the maximum power demand. So 9% of electric vehicles market share. So we probably need more, not more electricity, but you need to do a peak shaving or a peak shifting to tackle this demand. I will not go into details what we did for this, because we have real grid production data and consumption data from the grids. And then we use realistic data to compute this as well. Then we also had the rescheduling activity. So if at certain scenarios we found out that charging was no longer possible in some of the zones or subzones, what would we do then? So what we came up with another simulation system or a framework called Vethers, which is rescheduling because of delays in travel times. or rescheduling activities because of charging prices is time dependent. For example, either is it not possible to charge, or why is it not possible to charge is because the price is the maximum, because you cannot, production will become really expensive at that particular point. And then we saw how people are adapting to the new pricing. When we ask people at which price would you like to charge, if you have this scenario, people because we have in our group we have 250 electric vehicles that we gave to people, that was sponsored by a company, and they run and they have to pay a price, and then they have to interact with us and help us out to make these rescheduling decisions or these charging related decisions or pricing related decisions as well. Sorry for a rush in the end, but thank you so much for your for your participation. And if there are any questions, please let me know.
So, I am Panos Anastasopoulos. They asked me to handle the question session. So, are there any questions for Professor Yassar? Yes.
Is it necessarily the best way to go to convert to electric vehicles as opposed to getting the vehicles of any kind off the road? More people to use bikes, for instance, or transit? Because one of the issues, in addition to the environmental, is the urban design issue, the walkability of a community. And if you have vehicles on the road, whether they're electric or gas powered, you still have that factors that some people are driving.
This is actually a very interesting question from your side, but let me put it like this, because it's more difficult to invest in infrastructure. It's easier in US context. For example, if I say Buffalo, it's spread out. You haven't seen Belgian cities. They're very, very dense, very dense. So if you want to say, okay, please ride a bike, in some cities it's virtually impossible to have a bike path, because it's they're quite small, quite old, or protected by some kind of law. And if you want to, they're mostly sharing the same infrastructure with the car users. But if you want to do it here, and if you want to tell me that I will make independent bike paths, so a proof to this would be, I think if you make bike paths and so on, people will still adapt to it. But it's more difficult to convince a car user, as I said before, to shift the mode of transport. This is first thing. The second is if the infrastructure is available. So what we have seen in Belgium, for example, a city like Brussels, it's absolutely impossible to convince someone to go to a bike mode of transport because it's a big safety hazard. But in Hasselt, where we are located now in Belgium, there are independent bike pathways. Independent, they are never going to interact with the car users. So they are off the road. They have separate tracks, and you see the percentage of users of bikes there are more than 50% of the population use bikes as compared to Brussels, because of many other perception issues like safety, not perceptions but reality. I mean, and then you see I feel more safe in a car. So better to convince those people who are left with the car to at least convert to an environmental friendly kind of a mode of transport. Again, reason is in Belgium, 97% of the population use diesel vehicles, which is more polluting in the environment. The reasons are historical, because of they're cheap, they're very cheap, and diesel is cheap.
I got to put your boss.
Okay.
That's why.
Hey, that's good. You use the public mode transport.
But actually, more choice is part of your decision trees,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So if you want to run scenario.
Yes.
Very interesting, kind of survey results and the observation that has been derived from those results. But I wonder if you have done any sort of work. You mentioned briefly during our meeting. Let's say you propose some algorithms or advanced transportation management schemes algorithms, but have you kind of evaluated how effective those approaches are in terms of, say, reducing congestion, reducing, emissions and all that? I haven't seen any sort of figure that shows has improvement.
Telecommuting was one example, and this was realistically done. So this was because As I said, we are a federal institute for policy-related decisions for transportation. We make the mobility plan of Flanders, not for now, but we also take the urban spatial histories from the past and we predict the future also. So we try to do it for 2020, 2030. But what we did was, we had this decision of teleworking. So this was, in reality, we saw that a certain percentage of the population can do teleworking. And we asked the employees as a policy to allow them. And there we saw a reduction of 1.6%.
Okay.
And then you see in reality reduction in congestion.
I see. Okay.
But 1.6% is not significant still. We have to run more scenarios like this, more realistic, and then validate them with your real results. This is one example that you can do. Congestion charging was another one. We tried to do it, and again, as I said, strikes. So half of the country went on strike, and then they had to take it back. And there was another suggestion to pay per kilometer when you drive, so road taxation extra. And again, people were very angry, but we saw a sudden reduction, a very sharp reduction in congestion.
But I understand, but what about, even results from simulations and to predict,
This we have. I didn't put them here for a reason, because of, again, the time was okay, I could not do it. But we ran it for many scenarios. If you go to our website, I will give you a flyer for this as well. We have all the case studies with very detailed details there.
Okay.
So in the U.S., because of aging infrastructure, some of our large interstate highways are falling apart. And some cities and regions have experimented with simply removing them and taking that traffic and putting it back onto service streets in the cities. The big catastrophic traffic jams never materialized when these large interstates were removed. So I'm wondering how much more could be done, say, just using math to coordinate traffic flows with coordinated traffic lights and moving cars in groups at certain times and planning a trip so that a car gets into a batch and it moves moving batch cars and things like that.
I would say it's quite optimistic. It is, from a theoretical point of view, a very nice solution. This is, I would say, because my background is computer science, and my part of my PhD was to work on autonomous vehicles. And it was a realistic project funded by Volvo, and we did do such kind of a test in group-based mobility. It works, but in reality, by legislation, for safety reasons, for convenience reasons, probably it's not possible. So to move them in batches, just the thought of it would make you scared as an individual. Say, okay, I have to wait in a batch and then go and pass away let's say in a green wave, because all the traffic lights are now green because I'm moving in a batch. I don't think it would work in reality.
So let's say 20 years from now we have no drivered cars. All cars are self-controlled. And you say, I want to go from here to here. And the computer picks the route and batches all the vehicles and optimizes.
It works. I did the simulations myself personally, and you can increase the travel speed, so the free-floating time, because of they're autonomous. And humans, okay, I'm not saying machines do not do errors, but there is a less chance because of the intelligence being put into the technology. So you can increase the travel time if you do this actually, and you can even drive closer to each other because of all these technologies available, and that is a solution. But I think if you just remove and eliminate the link because you cannot maintain it anymore, you're really causing, you're really shifting the load to another, from one part of your network to another part of your network, and it's causing more problems. And we can do such simulations as well. So government asks us, okay, where should I put a new highway, a new freeway link, or where should I increase, which road shall I make one way to, and what will be the impact? So we can just simply in the simulation framework say, this is the network constraint, this is a single one-way road, or there's a new link, and then see how people adapt. What is the output of this policy decision? So this framework can do this.
Are there any other questions? Well, Professor Yassar, thank you very much for coming over. And Thank you very much for your attendance, and everybody, thank you for your tolerance for the distraction.
Can I make some announcement before before we
Sure.
finish?
Please, go ahead.
Because for students certainly, because I was told by Dr. Adil that there will be some students here as well. We will discuss this with Professor Dr. Sadik, but we plan to in Belgium. I don't know how much you pay here, but we have a master's program in English, also a PhD program, and we would be more than willing to. We were planning to offer tuition-free master's program to University of Buffalo students, because hopefully we'll do an agreement between the universities, so you can even come to Belgium for an exchange for a few months, do some courses, a part of your master's degree, and the rest of it here for free. So in Belgium, education is in Belgium is free, but for Europeans. So, but in general, we can offer this program to you because we have an agreement, such agreements with other universities as well in the past. For PhDs, we don't charge anything for a PhD because it's a job. We pay them to do a PhD. Full time, but this here we can again think of a solution where we can do a joint PhD. So if you're interested, please contact Dr. Adil, because I've been discussing with him or one of the other professors who have been here, and we can actually we have to work on the details for this, but we can anyhow offer this. You can come for 3 months, 6 months, 1 year minimum, or maximum 1 year, or for a full 4 years, but then you have to move there to Belgium. And then lastly, if one of you researchers, postdocs or senior PhDs or professors would like to come to Hustles to do joint research, we also have programs where we pay for 3 months and do joint research. So you actually have no problems in coming to us. So you can always contact me with my details, or you can contact one of your colleagues for more information. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Describe background seismicity. So events that are not typically associated with any specific fault, but still pose a risk in certain